The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Armed Radio. I am your host, Professor Jamie Lynn. Really excited to have my guest, David Rodriguez. And tonight we're going to be talking, of course, the infamous education and politics and what's going on with the current state of affairs in the U.S. And the topic, of course, as always, is why are we having all of these children committing mass murders and whatnot. So, David, take it away. Please introduce yourself.
Yes, awesome to be with you again, Jamie. My name is David James Rodriguez here, and I am principal of a private school called Valor Academy, which specializes in apprenticeships. Also run the Homeschool Leader group, helping parents learn about homeschooling. I have a YouTube channel called Education Options TV, and I also am a business partner with John Taylor Gatto and helped republish this book. And talking about the history of the school system. So
awesome. Can you see the comments? Can you see the comments? Gretchen said I think she said unschool your kids. I love it.
Go Gretchen. Vehicle. Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks for introducing yourself. And so I'll just recap again. I am Professor Jamie Lynn. I've been a teacher around the world. I have owned schools, been principal, school counselor, administrators, mental health clinics. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified behavior analyst. Did a PhD in psychology, went back to USC, did a second doctorate in education. I'm an educational doctorate candidate there. Tons of certifications. I've helped thousands around the world in the education and mental health market. So that's who I am, and I love the thought of getting unschooled.
We all need it, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have talked before, what is education, what is schooling, and then institutional, indoctrination, if you will. But why don't you give your background? Because I always like how you explain education.
Well, the short of it is that I came from a small town and just wanted to get out, and so I went and got a business degree. I started a business at age 21, and my mentor said, you got to read these books about business. And it turns out, there's other books other than Catcher for a Ride and Jurassic Park and all these lame books, which I was mandated to read in school. And there's other books. There's entrepreneurs and business people and successful people who have written about their life story and success, and they put it in a book. So I started getting interested in that. And then I learned about John Taylor Gatto, who was the two-time New York State Teacher of the Year. He was in the public school for 30 years. And he wrote the book Dumbing Us Down. He wrote the book Weapons of Mass Instruction. And he was a huge inspiration to me because in school I felt something was wrong. I felt there was a lack of inspiration. The teachers were bored, most of them. The students were bored. And you can feel it. You can actually feel what am I doing here? Because as soon as the bell rings, you're happy, you're free. And, we got summer coming up. This is May and June. As soon as the summer bell rings for you to have summer, the kids are like, yeah, freedom. And the truth is, as adults, we can have that every single day. So what are we doing inside these classrooms? And it's through the work of John Taylor Gatto and a lot of other writers as well, like Ivan Illich, he talked about deschooling. There's authors going back to the 20s and 30s saying these schools are, they're not functioning the way they should be. Well, if you take a look at Gatto's work, I highly recommend you take a look at his YouTube channel. He demonstrated that these industrialists did not want people thinking for themselves. This is a problem for them. So the schools, as they are now, what happens is you learn to become obedient. And that's the end result that they want. They don't want you being a creative innovator, thinking for yourself. And what they specifically don't want you is to challenge authority. Right. They want you to be in fear because someone has a badge, someone has a title, and say, oh, you're superior to me. And in my conclusion is that each human life matters, especially if you're if it's your life, and so to gain appreciation for your own mind and heart and ambitions and desires and goals and dreams, I think is the starting point of becoming an educated person. And once I found out that the schools were specifically designed for that, I said, so I got in learning centers, democratic schools. If somebody has to jump off the conversation right now, go to Summerhill 2008 on YouTube. There's a great movie talking about the democratic school model, and this model's been around for 90 years. So here I am, decades ago, sitting in a classroom, bored out of my mind, whereas these kids in Sudbury schools or democratic schools and now agile learning centers and such, they have freedom. You show up to class and they give you a menu of classes and say, hey there, student, welcome to our school. Here's the classes that we offer. Choose what you want to take and disregard what you don't want to take. And I thought that was a great idea because that's how it is for us. As we graduate high school, whatever age, 17, 18, they say, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? And you're like, I don't know, because for 12 years, you've been telling me what to do. You've been giving me homework assignments. You've been giving me a test. And now I'm supposed to be stressed out about college. And do I qualify? Are my SAT scores good enough? Well, what Gatto and a bunch of other great thinkers have said is that you are a genius.
Right.
Anything brilliant. Pablo Picasso said every child's a born artist. And Buckminster Fuller said every child's a born genius. The problem is they get de-genius trying to please their teachers and please their parents.
Could I go back to something?
Just accumulating on each other.
Could I go back to something you said? Because there was a lot of amazing information in there, and I'm looking up stuff as you're talking. So I had never thought about that before when I went to school. I used to love going to school. Because I'm very academic and intellectual, and you're talking a lot about the individualized learning, and I never thought about going to school and being bored during the day. And I felt that way, but I just busied myself because I was a high-level reader with reading things so I could get lost and drown out the teacher and draw out the other children. But I never thought, I have now, but back then, not only are you somewhat bored and you're not meant to feel like you're smart if you want to think outside of the box or you're comparing yourself to other children, but we have this current state of bullying, the emotional aspects of when you're going to education, and these teachers, nobody is talking about that. So all of these things are happening on campus. When I worked for LA Unified, I worked in the inner cities of East LA and Watts to upper middle class neighborhoods. So I've seen the whole gamut of demographics. But the one thing that's true amongst all of them is we're not really addressing social appropriateness, loving behavior. Obviously they took God out of the schools and spirituality, but nobody's really addressing those. So you're exactly right. I never thought that you're bored while you're sitting in class, and on top of maybe being bored or not feeling good enough, you've got the bullying going on, and that individualized self is being impacted. So I was looking at the history of education. How much about the actual history of education do you know beginning in the 16th century?
Well, what I know is that the mandatory compulsory school laws came into effect in 1852 in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And then from there, that was brought over by Horace Mann from Prussia, Germany, because Prussia, Germany had become a military state. They were mercenaries, and that's how their economy, a large portion of it, how they generated their revenue. So all these, elitists and these types of people, having elite rulers is not a new thing, right? It's kind of shifted from back in the day. You're a king and off with his head. So that's what we got to look at, is that who is trying to control who, and truthfully, kings, they fear an uprising from the masses because they far outnumber them. So, just to your point, I find about 80% of people had a kind of bad taste about public school or forced school, and 20% actually liked it. They were engaged or top of their class. Not that somebody's wrong. It's a matter of having freedom. Mm-hmm. So the crutch upon this whole matter, in my view, that I want to raise to the consciousness of humankind is mandatory attendance schooling. There's nothing else where you and I, or kids or elderly people, are mandated to be physically other than the school system. And that's for 12 years, 9 or 10 months out of the year. So during the most formative years of our mind, mental development, thinking, it's like you have to be here because we don't trust you. And so, as you mentioned, having loving being and presence and manners and all these civility, these things come by observing adults around us and seeing how it goes. And I was just searching YouTube last night, kind of learning about what's going on in Santa Fe and everything, and I came across some bus driver, and all of a sudden there's all these videos of bus drivers going bananas on kids in buses, just like they were when it was my age. So I don't know if you had rode the bus at all, but it's like, these kids are forced to be there. They're independent, whether they're 10 years old or 12 years old. It's like this. It's a deep amount of disrespect for them, and if they can't articulate that, like, you're disrespecting me. Where's the humanity? But they feel that, some bully or some adult who's telling them what to do when they don't even know these people. And these people, have compassion on these people. Like, okay, this is their salary, their job, so they are kind of tied or dependent on obeying the rules. But ultimately, if schools are meant to help kids, which, as you mentioned, the 1600s, yeah, they had one-room schoolhouses. They had 8-year-olds learning from 14-year-olds. They actually intermingled. There was no age segregation because that's the real life.
And it wasn't compulsory. It wasn't forced. And I always look at the Constitution around 1777 through 78, and when you look at, the equality factor that we're equal, and yet then you're sending them to schools. And then Thomas Jefferson, he was a huge proponent of charter schools. He was the one that was very avid about being a founding father, that schools should never be government ran. Because this is what will happen, that you'll end up having tyranny. And so you see, obviously, with what's happening in today's current education market, whether it's typical population or it's special education, because we've got a proliferation of mental health issues. But when you're looking at the aerial shot view of education and where we were from the 1600s to the Constitution and the founding of America to compulsory ed to here we are in 2018 and government ran schools compared to charter schools, homeschooling, private schools, and looking at all of these things that you talked about from an educational and historical factor, people don't realize is that public schools and what's actually happening right now is the tyranny. This is the problem with society that we've been enduring for now a couple hundred years. I was driving yesterday for volunteering. I volunteer a lot, as you know. I love philanthropy, and I was at a private Christian school. And as I'm driving home, I'm listening to Christian talk radio, and they're announcing that they're so excited in Folsom that they're building the first ever school that will be bulletproof with one entry in and one entry out. And mind you, Folsom is like the well-known prison, Folsom Prisons. And I immediately thought, they're actually like conditioning and trying to get people excited about the fact that you're going to have a public school that's paid for by hardworking tax dollars, where you're going to have one entrance and one. I literally just flashed to the early days of the 1900s with Hitler and people walking in and being fenced in. I would never, as a parent, send my child to a school where there's one entrance in and one entrance out. I personally, people know a lot of my personal story is that I'm an avid homeschooler. I'm an avid person that's proponent of private school. I think our public schools are the problem. And again, not to just boast about myself, but I'm a highly educated woman that's been in the education system for decades. And I believe that our public schools are the issue. They are the problem. The infrastructure, the operational designs, the systems, the content, the state standards, the forced compulsory, the bullying. I mean, the whole gamut is like, why are we allowing this to happen? And I personally look at things that are highly politically driven, like the president of America and these school shootings. And I'm always, how do we take these things that are so hostile and look at the positive part to them? Anti-vaccination, big pharma, all of these things that we're becoming awakened to. And then what's the next step? So how do we all band together and move forward in something that feels impossible? As you were mentioning, children feel this sense of less than and impossible. And then many of them on psychiatric meds will take guns and shoot their teacher. I mean, that's the big question too, is when I'm looking up the history of school shootings, they're usually adults. Now we do have this new trend that they're the children shooting the teachers and the other students. So that's a shift in the trends on school shootings, because school shootings is not a new phenomenon. Most people just think it is because of media. So I know I said a handful, so now you take it away.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it goes back to Columbine, and even before that, where the kids feel deeply disrespected. So what is their course of action, right? And a lot of it has to go to responsibility of parents understanding what is happening in these schools. So when you send your kids to school, it's not like it was for you 30 years ago. It's now progressed 30 years. The state is an organization. So just like you have a business and I have a business and people watching, they have a job or work for a company, there are motives. And financial motives are heavy. And so the schools get their money, as you may know, by the attendance. This is called ADA, average daily attendance.
Yeah, people.
That is why in California, if you have 3 unexcused absences, okay, little Susie is 8 or she's 14, unexcused, the state has the legal right, okay, to fine you up to $2,000 or jail you for a year. And I was so shocked once I found that out. And guess what? Each state has that.
I'm actually certified in it. I'm a child welfare and attendance certified. It was taught to us in our graduate school program. My teaching credential, my comes from Cal State LA, which we produced, I believe, back then the largest amount of teachers. And so I'm a child welfare attendant certified individual that was taught to us that this is something that we do. And somebody made a comment here. I'm not sure if you can see the comment. Sherry, who's very active in our community, is I had never really put that together till she commented right now. And you said at the same time, the money. Of course, we all know that we have a financial drive behind anything that we do. I wake up in the morning, you wake up, it's to survive. There's a survival component. But now when you've got schools, the medical community, so medications, pharma, and vaccinations, and the doctors all band together, and you look at that's a business plan, an operational manual for destruction and tyranny of the human population.
Absolutely. And so what it seems like is these guys, back as far as Plato and John Dewey and all these other guys, in the 20th century, these guys want a utopia. They want this perfect place where everybody just does what they're told, and that's everyone else, and then we're the elite, so they we can do whatever we want. But that's what they want. They want this perfect society. Whereas life has a risk. You and I are going to be in the dirt in 100 years. Hopefully longer. But this is just a fact. So there is no perfect way to have society go. And I don't desire a utopia. What I desire is that each person understands that they own themselves, and this is kind of what the age of responsibility that parents can, debate on. Is it, 16, 18, 12, whatever it is.
Right.
And, some of my buddies is like, as soon as they have a mind, they can start making decisions for themselves. So if that is true, which it seems to be, that you own your life, nobody owns your life, like your kids aren't your property, maybe you're a guardian over them, but they are independent, sovereign human beings, whether you believe in God or evolution or whatever you believe in.
Right.
They're a powerful being, and to put them inside of a building, especially in 2018 when you and I are, having a video conversation for free over the internet, they have access to all this information. So they have the cognitive dissonance to say, okay, I go to this building, I got to do all this homework, I come home or come back and do homework. But I can just Google something, I can YouTube something. They spend hours on YouTube learning about stuff, and there's a serious gap that parents, I invite you and encourage you to take a look at what an education is and really examine that word, because the root of education is educo, and that is to draw from within, to pull out. So rather than imagining your child's an empty cup and you got to pour something in and then they're going to pour it out, they already are a flower, and they just got to open up. And everyone has their own time, different, flowers and trees seed at different times. So that's what we are like. We're like these powerful living organisms that, we blossom in our own time. And what we all desire, it seems, is love, acceptance, appreciation, these types of things. And then we don't necessarily necessarily have to change the whole system. Just a matter of a few parents getting it and helping to save their kids from this compulsory school system. And it might take 10 or 15, 20 years. But as Gretchen mentioned and other unschoolers here, and maybe you said, like you said yourself, homeschooling, they'll see, oh, you homeschooled your kids or you unschooled your kids and now they're 20 years old, running their own company or traveling the world or just living a great life. I want my 10-year-old to have that experience. How have you done that? You know, so even taking a look at John Holt, who was talking about homeschooling in the 60s and 70s, you know. So we're actually, this is a snowball which is beginning to grow, and thank goodness for the internet, because without it, I don't think it would continue to grow as fast as it is. And then if you take a look at the homeschooling numbers, the numbers that I've seen have ranged from 2.5 million homeschoolers in the U.S. to up to 4 million. Mm-hmm. It might even be higher. It might be 5 or 6 million because there's a lot of unregistered unschoolers. But the state is going to try to keep those numbers down so that you can feel isolated and say, oh, you're going to homeschool your kid? Well, I'm just going to put my kids in the school system. And some people have to put their kids in the school system because of financial reasons. However, if you, mom and dad, can just sacrifice for 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe 6, and maybe from age 10 to 17, you know, maybe take a financial hit or move to a smaller place or a smaller town or work something out, they're going to be able to pursue what they're interested in, and then they can actually create mentorships, become an apprentice. They can even teach other kids. Let's say they're 12 or 14. They can go out and teach other young people and have that leadership develop within themselves. And the key skill, it seems, also is self-expression. You know, whether they're shy, they can become a writer and learn to express their ideas, express their concepts. Or if they're, you know, passionate about politics or passionate about, you know, farming or whatever it is, they go out and talk about this, go into open forums, go to meetups, and actually begin to express themselves.
So we have a comment on here, and I want to say a few things. You know, why are administrative authorities asking, demanding changes like this? For typical children, of course, and for the autistic or the special needs developmental disabilities. So herein lies the issue. We are. If you go on my Facebook or you research me, I have heavily been involved in politics. I have created schools. They've shut my school down. They create these laws. So we're trying to do what we can, and we're putting that effort forward. But I do think that homeschooling and being able to join into networks of other parents that are homeschooling or creating our micro communities is one of the solutions. We do have program designs. We have this capability now. Part of it is the economic impact, because parents have to work, and looking at the historical structure of having children, divorced families, parental involvement, the ability to be able to stay home with your children, and the economy. We've squeezed out the middle class. So there's a complicated ecosystem that we're looking at, but we are definitely trying to make infrastructure changes. So, I mean, people know in my arena with autism and ADHD and anything that's intellectually different, if you will, I have a program that retrains the brain. We have educational material and curriculum. We have the capability to do this, but the public schools red tape us and keep us out. This is why I have to go to private platforms. You have something called B2B, which is business to business. In the education market, your B2B is the government. So if the government doesn't like you and the government doesn't like what you're having to say, which is of course speaking out against the myriad of issues that are at play, the forced vaccinations, the diagnostic statistical manual labeling these children as different and less than, the prescription of pharmaceutical drugs and doping them up, the subpar academic material that we're seeing in comparison to other countries, the behavioral management issues, the bullying issues. So when you're somebody like myself or somebody like David, and we're saying, hey, we're essentially at the core civil rights activists that just happen to have educational material and being in this movement, there's really like, what do you do? And so we network together. We have, implementing essentially Facebook Lives, but then you've got algorithms and issues with that. And we go up to I go to the White House all the time. If you look at my page, I've been to other countries and I speak up. I've written a book, Hope for Autism, on Amazon. I think I've sold less than 15 copies, which is literally the solution. The subtitle is the $262 billion solution. And I have data. I mean, I have 300 plus employees, thousands of families. David has a history with his team of networks. So we're here and we exist. But again, it really is, I think, from an aerial shot view, very analogous to the civil rights movement when you look at, President Lincoln, and when you have the segregation of the African American population. And now what's happening is we have racial implications. We have heterosexual versus homosexual. We have spiritual or religious versus, we've got all of these things, but there are so many of us now that are banding together and just saying compulsory education is the issue. Pharmaceutical drugs is the issue. The American Medical Association, the American Pediatrics Association, the school teachers unions, all of these people at a higher level, a board level, have band together, and they're creating these laws and they're creating these infrastructures. And now you've got the economic, political environment that has the issue with, middle class being squeezed out. So you've got all of these things. I wish I had my board. We should have a Facebook Live where I'm at my office and I can draw all these visuals out for you. So I don't know. I just believe we're in a revolution. And I believe that these school shootings are the first step towards the outcry, saying we're in a revolution. Clearly, when you've got other children pulling out heavily armed, weapons and shooting other children, there's some form of a revolution going on, whether it's a mental health revolution, whether it's a political revolution, it's an educational revolution, it's a lack of parenting involvement revolution, it's a toxic agenda revolution. We are in a revolution. We are in a civil rights movement, racially, spiritually, economically, medically. It's happening now.
I agree. And now the state is just like octopus, this leviathan coming upon us. And because so many parents have blind trust in the state, and God bless America, and it really did start off to be a pure country. However, there's challenges with constitutional contracts and things like that. However, remember that the Bill of Rights were supposed to limit the government. It was supposed to limit the state. And now they're trying to, censor language, nullify Second Amendment. These are things that my rights don't come from the state. They don't come from California, the U.S. They come from my humanity or my God.
Your
However,
spirit.
they cannot be taken away.
Yeah, your
I
being.
am a human being. You know what I mean? So that's the key thing. And then, if your viewers and listeners want to take a look at the documentary called The Cartel, I believe it's in 2009, 2010, about the corruption in the system. And it documents these administrators who were making up fake employees and pocketing another $150K multiple times, and nothing happened. So here you have, I think it's over 50% of graduates, high school graduates in urban cities, who can't pass an 8th grade reading efficiency test. What have they been doing for 12 years? If they don't know how to read after 12 years of state control, something's going on, and that's what it's for, right? They don't want kids to be inspired by reading. Reading is one of the keys to becoming an educated person. You don't need a teacher. You pull up a book and you start reading it, and you can actually begin looking in the mind of a big-time thinker, a big-time writer, and look at how they word their arguments or word their phrases, and then you can say, do I agree with that? Do I disagree with that? Versus accepting it as it is. And so from the administrative standpoint, is a cool fact, the teachers union, the NEA, is the largest political union in the country.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? That means it's the big 800-pound gorilla, and where does the 800-pound gorilla sit? Anywhere he wants, right? Because they got all this money involved. You mentioned $250 billion solution, and I believe that's for the special ed.
$262 billion. No, that's autism alone. $262 billion is only autism. That's not factoring in all the other developmental disabilities under the IEP, which is the American Disability Act and Public Law 94-142. And the other gorilla is the Association of Doctors. So here you've got the Teachers Association and the Medical Boards Associations, and now here in California under SB 277, they've band together to say doctors are going to be in charge of your children now. And going back to your point on being, is nobody gets to take away our being and our spirituality. And somebody said, what are the suggestions? How do you stop shootings? You know how you stop shootings is we teach people to love each other. If we love each other and we come from a place of respect, And it doesn't matter if you're homeschooled, you're sent to a public school, you're in a private school, you're in a college. If we teach each other and we really address that bull in the china shop, which is this human hatred that we've developed towards each other, and why have we come to that place, is because it really does fundamentally boil down to the education system. Because children from ages 3 to 18 years old are handed over from the parental unit to a school and saying, you take care of my children, and you take care of them without any influence of the spirituality. You're not going to teach them to love each other. You're just going to cram material down the throat about which we deem under educational standards is appropriate for your child to learn. And then we're going to throw them out into a playground where they can engage in activities left unsupervised to engage in an interaction socially with each other. So that really is, I think, the solution. It's not going to happen overnight. I was telling, the people just jumping on, we've got a lot of listeners right now, and the school shootings are not new. This isn't a new phenomenon. It's just now the media is picking up on it and putting it out there. And Columbine, I've been very honored to work with I know her personally. She was the head psychologist at Columbine, and all of those students reported that they just felt that because the bullying was out of control in the psychotropic drugs, and the bullying was among not just student to student, it was teacher to student. Children are reporting all the time feeling spiritually and emotionally bullied by their teacher, the name calling, the pointing them out of this, of the students, that there's something wrong with you when you do something, ridiculing you and punishing you instead of showing you love and showing you encouragement and building you up, and troubleshooting with your peer teacher, your peer student, and coming from that place. So Columbine was one of the first publicized mass, shootings from a student to another. And we didn't learn from that one, but working with a lot of those teams and talking with those students, we learned that it fundamentally boiled down to the way that teachers were treating the children. And it wasn't so much blaming children to children is part of the bizarre part. We're saying kids bullying other kids, and then these children are obviously lacking the impulse control or the spirituality that's needed to love and respect other children. They're running down to schools, but they were reporting it was the teachers, it was the administrators. And I think we're hearing that time and time again. And the fact that these kids are put on psychiatric drugs. So-and-so's not listening. So-and-so's not sitting in his seat. So-and-so isn't smart enough. So let's send him to the doctor. Let's give him Adderall. Let's give him Prozac. Let's give him Ritalin. Let's give him some kind of psychotropic drugs. That's going to fix the ADHD or the oppositional defiant or the speech and language disorder or the impulse control that these children are having. So people aren't realizing the psychological bullying that comes along with these labels that are done from to the students by the teachers and the administrators.
Yeah, well, labels in general are very disempowering. Calling someone attention deficit because they can't sit in a classroom, they're a 10-year-old boy or a 12-year-old boy. Hey, some people have physical intelligence. Take a look at Howard Gardner's work. I'm talking about multiple intelligences, right? And I think there's probably 7 billion types of intelligences. Our DNA is so unique.
I love that.
Our experiences, right? It's like, why limit it to 8? That's better than 2, right? Math and language. But what about somebody who's a dancer? What about someone who likes art and music and singing? Is there not value in that in today's marketplace? Absolutely. The creatives are the one that is going to drive our society and mankind forward. And even Terrence McKenna has a great thing talking about the artists. The artists are the one who can see the visions and then paint it for us, whether through words and poetry or images. But what makes us human is our ability to create art. Because there's animals out there that can use like a stick or something like that to like make a tool. Oh, this little bird used a tool, or this little monkey used a tool. But us, you and I, we're talking about something made by some smart person. I'm on a Samsung, I don't know what you're on, but like, this is amazing stuff, and this is what we want. We want connection, these types of things. And there's a great quote that says, what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. So, yes, we want to teach all these things. However, it's the modeling that we're giving in our homes, the modeling in our own organizations, how we deal with people. And one of my speakers from my expo, he had a great point where he's like, the teachers in the classroom, and one student's being mean to another student, and he says, "Hey, you tell him you're sorry, you be nice." So here you have the teacher trying to resolve the problem and commanding somebody to be nice, but in fact, how are they being? They are being rude, they're being disrespectful, they're being demoralizing. So, more than the words that kids hear, they get offended. Just like you and I, if somebody starts yelling at us, we're like, that kind of hurts my feels a little bit. I don't like that. So kids are very sensitive, especially, now when you have, maybe like some indigo kids or these amazing kids that are coming out, and I'm learning about this stuff, and all I know is that the kids have the power. They got the magic, and the schools squeeze it out of them. Mm-hmm. And then if mom and dad are on board and like, you got to get good grades, you got to do that, and the kid is not into like an academically geared person. They're an athlete, or they're a dancer, or whatever they are, or maybe they're too smart for schools and says, "Oh, you're getting D's and F's." If that kid accepts that and says, "Yeah, I'm a failure, I'm attention deficit," they will wear that label their entire life. And there's a great guy, Les Brown, and he's a great speaker and businessman. He said, I think he was 10 or 12 years old, and the teacher told him to come up to the front of the class and spell a word. He said, "Oh, sorry, teacher, I can't do that." He said, "Why?" He said, "I'm educable retarded." That's what
Les Brown said that?
Les Brown said that. And then Mr. Washington, his mentor, he said, "Don't you ever let someone's opinion of you become your reality." So these are all opinions, right? And sometimes you'll notice some of the most ignorant people, but they have courage, or bombastic. They're out there living a great life. I think that's Mark Twain. He said you need two things to be successful: ignorance and courage. I believe that's what he said. But it's like, what is intelligence? This is a real conversation that I'm not trying to be philosophical, but when someone says that person is intelligent, I'm like, okay, I would like to understand, what does that mean? And if it's, you get a 4.8 GPA, well, okay, in some ways, that person is intelligent. They can pass that test. However, if I could go back and just get all bad grades, because I got decent grades, my parents, put me through that, and I love you, Mom and Dad, but it's like, I wish I would have learned how to build a house, or build a boat, or plant and make gardens, or these kind of cool things, wire a house, or, these kind of things. And it just wasn't available because it wasn't on my radar, and nor was it on my teacher. My mother was a teacher, and, I got teachers inside of my family as well who I love. However, the system is so powerful, and it's so compartmentalized that the teachers really don't have power. And that's why many teachers I think the average teacher stays like 3 or 4 years, and they're like, what's going on here, man? Like, I wanted to help kids, but now I'm not helping kids. I'm actually delivering this curriculum from the state, and I got to juggle 125 students, so they're overwhelmed, and they got to pay their bills. So it's this spiral, and I think the best solution is taking a look in the mirror, the man in the mirror, the woman in the mirror. I have no hope in politicians. I know that we can make incremental changes, but, it's been going on for decades, and no transformation has occurred. And I think the transformation that excites me the most is homeschooling, is unschooling, and more specifically is self-directed learning.
I like that. So back to the question on intelligence. So there's a really good book I talk a lot about called The Mismeasure of Man by a Harvard paleontologist. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. His name is Stephen Gould. And correlating that to artistic, if you think about it, I interviewed an amazing artist, when I was in Puerto Rico, and, what is the definition of art and what is the definition of intelligence? And the response was that they're really one and the same. So if you look at childhood development and our children, we were all children, so child development was us, and we're still developing in different, regions of our brain or our spirit or our maturity level and whatnot, according to different theories like Erikson and Piaget, and we won't get into that. But intelligence and artistic are really one and the same, because childhood development, we all created, we all made something. We started out with our intelligence being ingenious, ignorant, and courageous, right? A blank slate as little toddlers running around, so ignorant, as you referenced, Mark Twain, and courageous, which was no fear. We just kept putting one foot in front of the other and grabbing things with our hands and learning to make and create. And that's artistry, is making and creating with intelligence. And so this Harvard paleontologist, the measure of man, says, essentially, I love what you said. That was the first time anybody said it, is that there's 7.5 billion types of intelligence. That's like an amazing title for a book, right? Because everybody has their own form of intelligence, creativity, artism. What we're doing right now is an art. You know, I'm sending from my frontal lobe a message to my mouth and my hands to come up with something to say in inspiration of hoping that I'm going to be creative enough, inspirational enough, put together logic and emotion at the same time to empower people to go and then do and create, right? So that's intelligence and artistic capabilities all in one package.
Absolutely. And what you're demonstrating is being present in the moment, because many times we can project into the future and try to plan out everything that's going to happen, and it's hard to come to grips and say, oh, I don't know what I was going to say at minute 45. Well, being present here and in this moment, you know, Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, if we can get present in this moment, which young people so are, like, that's what I get so inspired when I see a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old. They're like, what are we doing? You know, I have 2 nephews and a niece, and like, yeah, what are we doing? I'm like, what do we want to do? Let's go. There's not like this, you know, planning or over-analyzing the situation. It's like, let's have a water balloon fight. You know, that's what I did a couple weeks ago. And I was like, all right, we're just throwing water balloons, pouring water on us and having a good time. Being present and being human. And that's one of the key things, too, is in the future, these devices, some people are going to implant stuff, and they've already started implanting, like, little chips in people who are like, I can open up a door. You know, they're happy about this.
Yeah, I saw that.
I just saw this one device. Yeah, I just saw this one device. It's like looks like a bar or something. It goes from the ear to the mouth, and it said it can read your thoughts, and it shows some guy.
I've seen that.
Navigating his Netflix thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So
I do want, though, if I can interrupt, I do want that for the developmentally disabled population. So I used to run quantitative electroencephalograph machines, and we would do pre and post studies in our clinics and our schools. So we would hook up the 19 areas of the brain with sensors, and we measure the microvolt squared frequency within your brain. And I can essentially tell you, you know, what's going on in the different regions and what that translates into human behavior. And to side back to the indigo children, the rainbow children, the crystal children that you mentioned, as we were doing these studies, because these children were exhibiting the ESP, clairvoyance, savant skills, and I was trying to figure out how are these particular children that are nonverbal, that are incapable of having a sensual vocalization, but we're teaching them to type, and they're communicating through these new technological devices, which, you know, it's a vice. Sometimes it's that double-edged sword. So being able to have these particular technological devices where now we can hook up, you know, children with developmental disabilities, or even implications for these shootings like we're talking about. So I have a friend at UC Irvine that owns a company where they do high-end security contracts. They're contracted with the government, and they look at the airport system. And so I don't know if people know this or not, but this is something that essentially a school could put into place that would be a solution, as opposed to continuing to talk about more armed security, arming the teachers, you know, building fences around the schools. But when you're in the airport and you're walking through, there are sensors similar to the ones I was talking about with the quantitative electroencephalographs, where we're measuring brainwave frequencies by microvolt squared. We can measure biomechanical markers. So your heart rate, you know, how fast your heart's beating, your skin temperature, because when you're anxious or you're angry or you have thoughts that are going on that might be harmful to yourself or others, those biomarkers of your heart rate, your skin temperature, your galvanic skin response, your diaphragmatic breathing, that all of these things can be measured. So if technology-wise, I mean, you think about satellites, you think about cell phones, you think about these machines that we're, you know, talking about hooking up somebody's brain to and can read your thoughts with proper oversight and management, of course, and as usual, a loving and benevolent outcome as opposed to an evil one, they can make a difference.
Right, and technology is a double-edged sword. So it's like, this is beneficial technology right now. However, the state can use it to, transform actions and behaviors, and that's what they want. So, yeah, technology is great, you know, and so use it to benefit freedom, use
It's scary.
Scary too, right? So using it to benefit humans and to respect each person's self-ownership is the main thing. And, you speak about oversight and these kind of things. Yes. So who should be the rulers? For me, I don't want any rulers, right? I'm connected to universe, to God, right? And so I, claim my own ownerships, my own sovereignty that my parents birthed me through passionate love. I was created and released into this existence. So now here I am, and these kids, they might not be able to get to that point because it took me a while. Maybe it did you. I know you're super smart. It's like, oh yeah, we're the ones. These indigos and these types of great powers. And your viewers and listeners might enjoy this video online as well about the third eye. Type in, I think, 12-year-old girl can see with their third eye. I don't know if you saw this or not. They literally cover up her eyes with blindfolds and write on a piece of paper and say, what am I writing? And she can say, oh, you're writing, hello, you're writing bye-bye, or whatever they said. And it's just mind-blowing to see that this third eye, maybe in the science world as the pineal gland, can project and it can see something. And whereas before, you're like, how can anybody see with covered eyes? So we're to the point, I think, I'm just questioning so much of what I've been told of what the human possibility is.
Yeah.
And, how important consciousness is. This is a really powerful one, too. Albert Einstein, I think this is in the 40s, they did this huge convention of physicists. And one of the takeaways was that the observer can affect the outcome. So if we're doing an experiment and then I'm looking at it versus if I'm in the other room not looking at it, my consciousness, my attention on that experiment can change the outcome of that experiment. So the power of our consciousness and our focus is greater than we know.
Did you just hear? Yesterday I read a study on that, or I heard it about they did it in school. I think they did like 1,000 participants of growing a plant. And so one plant was taught the same exact seed, same exact process. And the plant that was bullied, it was a bullying project. The plant that was bullied and talked negative to literally died. And the one that they talked lovingly and kind and sent positive energies flourished and grew against a baseline of what a plant usually should. So we know that. I've met with so many amazing doctors last week and this week that a lot of them are from India. So going back to, when you look at spirituality and you look at different, spiritual orientations and the thought process of being, one with spirit and this, so I did look up the girl with the third eye. And I saw that, but there is a girl in India, her name is Nananda, who they have proven also with the ESP, she can read minds and the sensitivity to other person's consciousness and the brain waves or the frequencies of which humans interact. And so when I work with a lot of these Indian or Hindu philosophies that for a long time have been, in existence and then in comparison to Christianity, because there's equally in the Christian community just as much research that's compared to stuff like this on Hinduism that looks at the power of telepathy or miracles happening or power of what Christians would call premonition. And so in the Christian community, there's just as many research studies where they took a church and they measured, they randomly selected atheists, they scouted them. It was a process. So they picked people that intentionally were not Christian, and during times of worship or singing hymns within the Christian church, they agreed with these participants to measure the serotonin within their bloodstream. And despite the fact that they were non-believers, they compared the people that were walking by a church versus people that were not, and they were having higher serotonin levels, which is, as we know, the feel-good, the benevolent neurotransmitter in the brain and the stomach. So those studies are fascinating, and I do think that those are part of the solutions. As you and I are talking about these things, people probably watching us who like us, love what we preach. We hope people will share this and listen on iHeartRadio, where we host this particular show, and teach this to the future generations. You know, I've shared many times, so I talk like this to my children, and they go with my ex-husband, who's a police officer and very much a different mindset. He's completely pro public schools, and that's why I can't homeschool after the divorce anymore. Those rights were taken away from me, and he's pro all of those different things. And my children will say, "You're crazy." You know, Papa says that that's paranoid, delusional. That's that schizophrenic talk that you start speaking when you speak about children having gifts, or indigo children, or them being able to type, or, you know, Mom, you're a conspiracy theorist, you know, that the government is evil. And I'm like, oh my gosh, please, guys. Like, so my own children, my own inherent rights as a mother have been taken from these concepts of public schools versus private schools. And coming full circle as we close this conversation on mindset, it really does come down to mindset. And of course, how dare the children question the teacher, whether, you know, things like telepathy is real, or savant and ESP is scientifically legitimate, or is homeschooling a positive experience, or what is the real truth about the Native Americans, or what is really going on with bullying, or hey, you know, telling your teacher. I remember when I was in 9th grade telling my teacher, "You can't talk to me like that," you know. And then I was sent to the principal's office. And I remember when I look at my junior high and my high school days, and I think about my relationships with students versus teachers, the teachers were the ones that caused most of the irreparable damage for me. I'm one of those people that was diagnosed with ADHD and, you know, labeled certain things and prescribed different medications. And until I had my awakening experience and was able to opt out of that agenda, have I been able to see clearer now and start a new mission and keep spreading my story to listeners and people that are open to being conscious, to being awake, to being enlightened by this knowledge that many of us are actively banding together and trying to share.
Right, and because of this increase of consciousness, there's a lot of paradigms that are being broken. And so that's in the medical field, as you stated, the educational field, technology, communications. I mean, for the first time, people can start their own television channel, as you and I are on video TV right now, and you can have YouTube channel, all these things. So we have these platforms out there. So what I would encourage all the people out there, whether you're passionate about education or freedom or solutions for health, get on a platform and begin getting your voice out there, because the government, the state, the power elite do not like us having a free conversation. They like us being afraid. They like us having low vibrations and not speaking our truth and speaking our voice.
Can I interrupt you really quick? Because this is something I've been talking to our nonprofit board about, and a lot of our guests, is I'm having to untrain myself by saying the government. Like what I've spoken like that for a long time, the government. We need to come up with collectively what we're really, talking about, because it isn't just the government, as we talked about before. It's the politicians, the people that make up the government, but they're now doing it with private sector. They're doing it with the medical doctors. They're doing it with other clinicians like myself who are therapists or psychologists. They're doing it with technological platforms like Facebook data collection. So it's both private and public sector. So if you could help me, because we've talked about this, is we do kind of sound like mass hysteria, like the government, but it really isn't. It really does fundamentally come down to...
No, we don't.
Some people say that. I'm not saying that, but it's both. It's the private sector and the public sector.
I got you. That's called fascism, where the state gets together with mega businesses, and that's what's happening.
Fascism.
So the real issue is coercion is the enemy. Violence is the enemy.
Okay.
So if somebody is coercing or forcing other people, they are the bad guy. Now, when they stop doing that, when they stop being forceful, when they stop coercing people, threatening people, then they're fine. They're no longer a bad guy anymore. But in the moment of that coercion, in the moment of that violence, they are the bad guy. Now, if you go take a look around the world, most people are really nice. You've probably traveled the world. I've done a little bit myself. People are pretty much the same. They got different cultures, but they just want to be respected. Don't touch me. Respect my space. I'm in my little bubble right here. But in terms of owning your life, owning this space, that's what it comes down to. And then the great Jeff Berwick said, yeah, right now there's about 200 governments, but one day there'll be 7 billion governments, and that's our own authority. And then John DeLevy said, we're all president of our own nations. Imagination. So that is the truth. I am president of my own being. I'm president of this body. And also, one of my buddies is like, so where do you live? And I was telling him where I live. I said, where do you live? He says, in this body. So rather than living in an address or this home or that home, don't we live here? Don't we live inside this vessel of this temple, this amazing creation that we're a part of? Yeah. That's what I think the issue is. And if somebody begins to infringe on my self-ownership, I now have the right to defend myself, to protect myself, to survive. And that's the only time when lethal force is justified if someone tries to, put their arms on me or attack me. And that's the only time that I would be violent to, stay alive and to risk it. However, as it was with the Revolutionary War, at some point when a state gets so large, people got to get together and create their own, not their own state, but their own alliance, their own associations, and then make agreements saying this is what we agreed to. We agreed to voluntary relationships. We agreed to interact if we want to, and we can part ways at any moment. Yeah. Unless the contract binds that way. So I know you're getting down to the last hour here, but that's the essence. Is actually force versus voluntarism and peaceful, harmonious relationships.
We can, of course, on Facebook Live continue our conversation, but in my ear, I do have the producers telling me we have about 20 seconds left, so I do want to wrap up on our amazing production company and producers at Armed Radio on iHeartRadio, and thank them as usual for allowing me to have my talk show and our platform and have amazing guests like you, David Rodriguez, on here. So thanks, guys, at Armed Radio. I appreciate you, and I am signing off.
Thanks, Armed Radio.
Professor Jamie Lynn. Awesome.
Filled with catastrophe, but she knows she can fly away.